This is the Bates Bobcast, our weekly podcast where we take a look at the week that was in Bates athletics. My name is Aaron Morse, and for the summer months on the Bobcast, we are taking a trip down memory lane with student athletes and coaches from the past. This week, we catch up with Colleen O'Brien, a multi-sport star from the class of 1992. That's coming up on the Bates Bobcast. Colleen O'Brien starred as a women's soccer and softball player during her time as a Bobcat. She was a two-time All-American in women's soccer, leading Bates to the 1991 ECAC championship with her game-winning goal against Smith College in the final. Playing third base, O'Brien helped lead the Bates softball team to multiple winning seasons as well, earning regional All-America honors in 1990. O'Brien went on to play some pro soccer in Sweden and the United States. Today, she joins the Bobcast.
I graduated from Medfield High School in Massachusetts, which was a relatively small public school, and hadn't, spent much time outside of that town. I was a small town girl for sure, and had, pretty competitive soccer experience and very competitive softball experience in high school. We would move into tournament time from the postseason, but softball particularly. My sophomore year, I went to the state finals for Division III softball. I had a total dynamo coach, and we didn't have lacrosse at the time or really a ton of spring sports. And so all the fabulous athletes played softball, and I had come from a pretty competitive softball experience, but soccer was really my love. And I definitely knew I wanted to play college sports and felt like going to a small school would allow me to do that. Although I did consider some Division I schools for soccer, but, soccer was different in the 90s. The 91 was the first Women's World Cup for soccer. And, there just wasn't, it just wasn't the same as it is now. I think it's much more competitive. I think young people are much more skilled and have early experiences that sort of help them progress as athletes in all sports, but certainly in soccer. And so I knew I wanted to play college sports. And I also was a good student. And so the ECAC schools were definitely on my radar. I don't quite remember how I learned about Bates, but, and I didn't know anyone that had gone to Bates in my world. So I looked at Middlebury, Bates, and Bowdoin, and Colby, and applied to all of those, and had a particularly awesome interview at Bates. And it's sort of a funny when you're 17 and you don't totally know what you're doing. Some things are just gut reactions. And also because I'm kind of a relationship person, I certainly think that connecting with the person that I connected with at Bates made a difference. As shallow as it seems to pick a college based on an interview with one person, it definitely was a decision maker for me. I can't remember who I was interviewing with, but she was a Bates grad and she was an athlete, a track star. And so there was sort of an instant connection there around athletics. And certainly that was a big marker for me in terms of what felt right. I also was not much of a test taker, and Bates was one of the few schools at the time that had an optional SAT reporting. So I opted out of that, and I think it made me a much more favorable candidate because that wasn't necessarily a very good indicator of who I was as a student. And so it worked in my favor in terms of applications. And yeah, so Bates became really, I sort of waited. I don't know as I really knew, like, wow, that's my first choice, but it was one of my choices. I thought about other schools, and I had applied to one Division I school, Boston College, and was waitlisted there. And I don't know totally why, but I wasn't recruited there. So the sports thing didn't work for me there. But they probably have a lot of people that apply from Massachusetts. And so I didn't bother to wait for that, to come to fruition. And so I chose Bates fairly soon after I was accepted.
And it sounds like, did you not really connect with the coaches themselves until after you got to campus, or how did that work kind of?
Yeah, again, I think in those early 90s with, being, I think, probably the first generation of Title IX women that had like a full lifetime of sports experiences, I definitely was maybe it sounds so funny to say it, but I think Diane Betcher and I had mailed some correspondence to each other because there were no computers either. I mean, you just didn't communicate that way. And so, I think she was clear. She knew that I was coming. She knew that I was interested. And I think like the funniest experience probably was sending my VHS tape in the mail to her. And, again, like you didn't make recruiting tapes back then. And then, I think the same was true for Sherry DeShane. I think she knew I was an athlete that was interested in playing. Recruiting was totally different. I mean, I would always love to hear about like what that must have been like on the coaching end of things. But, as a woman, as a bright, athletic woman, you didn't choose like sports over an education in 1988. It was like the goal was to get to the best school you could get to. And that was very true of my peers at Medfield High School. People go to college. 99% of our population were college bound. And so, it was important to get an education. And that definitely factored into my choices for colleges in general. Was like, I'm not going to be a professional athlete, although I wanted to be. And so you chose your education, and that Bates was an amazing place to do that.
Yeah. And then Diane Betcher, you mentioned her. She was the first women's soccer coach in the program's history. Your first year was her last, but tell us about your memories of her in that final season for her in your first year.
Yeah. As a freshman, I think, everything seems a little bit wild and woolly. I don't have like remarkable memories of Diane, other than I know she was a really committed soccer coach. She seemed to have, great relationships with her players. And I played my freshman year. I don't believe I was a starter, but we had my incoming class, 9 of us were freshmen on that team that first year, my first year team, which is, was nearly half of the team. And there were, Sarah Carruthers and Michaela Corkery and Beth Widman all had been kind of like superstar high school players for their teams. And that, again, like put that in context of, 1988. But ironically, we were all like very similar players and very competitive people and good athletes. And so, having so many of us as freshmen on a team, I'm sure was, and to be at the level I think that we was a good pick for Diane. Like she got some good players, I think, in my class. Diane wrote me lots of recommendations in my life, and she's been a good, I don't have any contact with her anymore, but she was a good committed coach. I think she went to Davidson after. I don't remember where she left to, but yeah, so I had 3 coaches in 4 years. So that was definitely a lot of change for a program. But, luckily we had a good, solid group of people that stuck with a 4-year playing program.
Right. So your second year, Brian Schachter, only one season. What do you remember about Brian Schachter?
Yeah. I remember most about Brian was fitness was like definitely a characteristic of his coaching. I mean, I don't know as I've ever been as fit as I was that year. We did a lot of physiological testing, not like fancy, but more like we were always taking our pulse, and we had a pretty good sense that we were, probably the fittest team on the pitch. And, that sort of sticks in my mind. I had a lot of sort of good players above me for years, but not to the number that my class had. I mean, I don't think any other class had as many players on the team as we did. And so, as that group of 9 traveled, and stuck with it. We definitely had a pretty powerful team those later years. And Marty was my junior and senior year coach, and she was really like super technical coach. Like, I think she really brought out the best in us in terms of technical skill. We were also quite fit, but the difference between Brian and Marty was really that Marty integrated fitness with technical, performance. And that was pretty powerful. She was a colorful character for sure, Marty. And for whatever reason, like, we were very tight under her leadership. The team was very tight and very close. And I think, she was a winner. And I think we sort of rose to that occasion as a group, and she was part of that for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say the first 2 years, 6-7, then 6-7-1. But then your junior year, Marty Kingsley's first year as head coach, 11-2-2, ECAC semifinals. And then your senior year, 12-3, and you win the ECAC championship, defeating Bowdoin 2-1 and Smith 1-0. I was reading some articles about that. That was at UMass Dartmouth. Some Bates fans bust down to the matches. I read about that, and how I believe the Bowdoin match ended in a shootout, and Smith, you had the lone goal in the Smith match. So tell me about the experience of playing in ECACs. First, I guess you got your feet wet junior year and then winning it your senior season.
Well, I know for sure that NESCAC schools were not allowed to participate in the NCAA tournament. And, again, like, I don't know, as I was watching or paying attention to all these details, I just, I just wanted to play, and I was very intense, very competitive. I still am. And so, to me, I don't know if I was paying attention to the NCAA thing or the ECAC thing, but the ECAC experience that was the highest we could go. And so, my junior year, we played Williams. I believe we lost to Williams at Bates in, what was it, the semifinals?
Semifinals 2-1, it says.
Yeah, and that was a really frustrating game. I was, I definitely was a goal scorer, and I got completely shut down in that game, and that was really sad. And ironically, later on in my life, I ended up meeting that woman who had covered me in that game, and she became my roommate and is one of my really good friends. And so that was, I said, "Hi, I'm Colleen." And she said, "I know exactly who you are." And so that was hard, I think, to lose to Williams. I don't know if we had played Williams in the regular season, and we knew they had a very competitive coach and a very competitive program. And so that was definitely, to lose to them. I think they ended up winning that year. I think. And so, that was a great experience. But then my senior year, to have, sort of that in hand at the end of a really awesome season was pretty special. That goal I scored in that game was pretty wimpy. It wasn't, I have a good memory of that goal. It was one of those, maybe a missed hit, or just not a good crack. And it was one of those backing up kind of wobbly. I remember going in and thinking, "Oh, that's good that just went in," because the game itself was, and that was in the Smith game, right? So we had to get through Bowdoin, and we had a shootout, and so that was, I have good memories of those days, really good. That was really the highlight of my career at Bates for sure, and sort of for me, I think jump-started a whole interest in playing after college. So I did end up playing in Sweden for a short time. I actually blew my knee out my senior year in softball. A base runner hit me in my senior season of softball, and I had just gotten a sort of a mini contract in Sweden, and blew my knee out right after that. So I ended up going to Sweden and playing for about 6 weeks with a partially torn ACL, and then blew the rest of it out there. But it was a really positive experience. I just saw one of my teammates from Sweden last summer, which was really pretty great to sort of have 30 years pass and have that still be a big part of my life. So that was cool.
You touched on softball. I mean, you had the same coach, obviously, there all 4 years, Sherry DeShane, longtime Bates softball coach. What are your memories about Sherry and what she was like as a coach? I interviewed her a few weeks ago. She still lives here locally, basically. So.
Wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
So, I told you that my high school program was pretty competitive. So when I came to Bates, I'm a small person. I wasn't like a big home run hitter or anything like that, but I had pretty solid skill foundation. And so I played my freshman year. I think I was a starter my freshman year. Don't quote me on that, but, so I was a third baseman, and, I really loved softball. I sort of laugh. No one in my family likes baseball, and I'm like, it's such a great game. And so, again, I think, Sherry was a good, solid coach. She was there for a long time. I did not play my junior year, but I played when Michelle and Rachel were both players. They were juniors, I think, when I was a freshman. So I had 2 years with them. And Michelle was a pitcher. Rachel was shortstop, I believe. And that was those two women were really pretty amazing athletes. And Rachel, I would say particularly, because she was a multi-sport athlete. She was a basketball player too. And she was tall and strong. She played in the Olympics, actually, I think, after. She played handball in the Olympics.
Yeah, she played for Team USA. Never got into the Olympics, but she played for Team USA.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right. So thank you for clarifying that. So that was really, those women were pretty amazing to play with. And, I think that, didn't have the same kind of feel for me as soccer, because I think I had so many of my peers playing soccer. Like all my friends my freshman year were my soccer teammates. And there was a little less population, influence. Like we just didn't, I think I was maybe one of 3 or 4 freshmen my freshman year. So I think that personnel switched out. So maybe not quite as rich and long lasting an experience for me, but certainly a really positive experience.
What did it mean to get All-America honors? When you got it, what was that like to get that so early as your time at Bates? Basically?
Surprising for softball. I was really surprised by that. I was a super scrappy player. So I think I had a lot of steals. Like I was really good on the base path. I almost always got on base. I could bunt, I could hit and get on base. That was like surprising a little bit. With soccer, I think, that was super, again, sort of super special to me. Soccer was really my deepest, greatest love. And so that, I think my junior year, I was like second team. But my senior year, I was first team, and that I ended up going to the banquet in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania that year, with my parents and with Marty. And that was a really special thing. I was, I went to that event and basically met all the people I had competed against for years in Division III soccer. So that was kind of cool for me. I think there was a woman from Williams and a woman from Connecticut College who we knew each other because we were always hearing recruiting notes about those women. And so that was pretty special. That is definitely like my greatest achievement, athletically speaking. Although, going to Sweden was cool, and I ended up playing for the Boston Renegades for 2 years, 2 summers, which was sort of the pre-women's professional team out of Boston. But I sat on the bench. So that wasn't like I wasn't like scoring tons of goals there, but I was training with them and playing years and years after Bates ended. So
you went to Sweden first and then came back and played in Boston?
Yeah. So after I graduated from Bates, I moved to Sweden and I lived with a host family, and I played in the Division II program there. And then came home, had my knee repaired. I coached for UNH for a year as an assistant for the women's soccer team there. And then after that, I was not in coaching for many years, but well, that's not true. I moved to Seattle after that and I played almost 7 days a week, soccer 7 days a week. This is after my ACL reconstruction. And I coached for a club team there. And then I've done quite a bit of coaching since then. Right now I'm coaching my 9-year-old son's team. My first foray into boys soccer, very different than women's soccer. And that's been a really positive experience for me. I've done some middle school coaching and club coaching, but my dream would have been to be a high school coach, but it's hard, it's hard to be a teacher and to be with other people's kids all the time and then ignore your own children further by coaching someone else's kids. And so, I had 2 boys, and one of them is a soccer player and super loves soccer like I did. And, but, I'll continue to coach in sort of a less primary role. And I'm a teacher, so I'm definitely around a lot of young people who are playing the game still.
For sure. At Bates, you mentioned obviously 2-time All-American in women's soccer. It looks like you were teammates maybe your first year with Bethany Maitland.
Yeah.
She was the first All-American in the women's soccer program's history. What do you remember about her and what she brought to the table, kind of?
Yeah. Bethany was an amazing player. She was from Massachusetts, Beverly, Mass. And, she and I played similar positions. So when she was on the field, I was either filling in another place or spelling her, giving her some relief. She's really probably one of the best soccer players I've ever met.
So who were some of your most memorable teammates, whether it be soccer or softball? You touched on a few of them, like Michelle Farrow and Rachel Clayton in softball, but who were maybe some others?
Yeah. So I think there were 3 teammates that I had that were pretty special to me. So Beth Widman, who was a freshman when I was a freshman. She and I graduated together. Really amazing, super scrappy, little player that seemed big on the field. So definitely her. And then Sarah Carruthers is one of my really dear friends, and she was from Wellesley, Mass, and really probably one of the most, she is the super fast, super determined player who I think she and I played really well. We were attack players, so she and I spent a lot of time finding each other on the field, and so that definitely is special, and she and I are still very close. And then Michaela Corkery was our center back sweeper, and she also was and maybe still is, but definitely was a really amazing defenseman, and really saved us, I would say, a lot in the back. So those are definitely my 3 special picks for sure.
Great. You mentioned Marty Kingsley was a bit of a character. Tell me about what made her a character.
Yeah, I think Marty's leadership was to maybe be a little bit for there to be a little adversity with her, and that brought us together. I think that was definitely a skill of hers. She had us in the pool. So sometimes she would put us in the pool and we'd have to play water polo, which is totally impossible, like a sport. And then in the off season, she had us playing squash. So we would set up appointments with her and play squash against her, which was all about, I'm not a squash player, but it was a lot about footwork. And I think, she just had some like non-traditional fitness, plans for us that I think, just made us all around good athletes. And I think that was pretty important. The thing that I think you had asked a question in the questions you sent me about what I was doing in the off season. So starting my freshman year, I spent every Friday night or nearly every Friday night playing with the men in the cage. Does the cage still exist?
Yes.
And so my freshman year, I would I would go, I don't know how I had the kahunas to do this, but I just would go and play with the men. And it was a quicker game for sure, and a much more physical game. And I think I really, Sarah would often go with me, Sarah Carruthers, and maybe some other folks too. Beth was a skier, a competitive alpine skier, so she was often, not available during the off season. But Sarah and I would spend a fair amount of our Saturday nights playing with the men, and I think that really made a big difference for us. It was, like a super ballsy thing to do as a freshman, and I think that was maintained. I think as we got older, we were then supporting a women's indoor program. So in the off season, I think we were playing in the cage. But I'm not sure there was something like that for women when I first got to Bates, which is why we played with the men.
Dirt floor in the cage then, or no?
Dirt floor.
Dirt floor. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it was the coolest and strangest building of all time. And we played softball in there preseason.
So it sounds like a lot of time spent in the cage and a lot of time spent in Merrill Gym with the pool and the squash courts, right?
Yep. And then I played all, my summers, I played soccer. I don't think I played softball at all out of season, but I had a teammate actually from Bates who lived close to me. And we used to meet at Boston College, and he was actually the keeper for the men's team. And he and I trained 2 summers, I think, as an attack goalkeeper pair, which was a pretty cool experience. But Bates was a pretty cool place for me. It took me a while. I think academically it was hard for me. And it was all I could do to keep myself enrolled there. But I was thinking about professors and stuff. And like I used to babysit for my professors. And I went over to Professor Murray's house for dinner. I mean, teachers there, it was like a family. And I think that was pretty cool. I didn't leave campus much. I was pretty much a campus gal. I didn't have any wheels. So the idea of leaving campus and exploring Maine, which I wish I had done because Maine is such a beautiful place. I pretty much, with two sports and school being as hard as it was for me, I definitely was campus centric.
Where was the softball field located when you played?
Oh yeah. So both the soccer and the softball field were located also, I think off of Russell Street. Does that sound right? Okay. It was not behind the gymnasium. None of those fields were built. I don't even know if Bates owned that land at the time. So the men's field and the field hockey field were over by JB.
Right.
And then the women's soccer, there was like a woodland that separated the path to Merrill Gym. On the other side of that woodland, the women's soccer field was there and the women's softball field.
Okay, interesting.
I don't know what's there now.
Well, they have some outdoor tennis courts and Underhill Arena are in that area.
Okay, so that must have been consumed when they were building.
Interesting. Okay. What was the softball field like? Was it decent or what was it just?
Yeah. I mean, I think it was a skinned infield, so no grass. Yeah. And then the soccer field was beautiful. Really nice grass, really nice place to play. Wet. It was wet.
Sure. Speaking of that, I mean, the ECAC we were talking about earlier, I understand it was pretty wet and rainy conditions for those, at least your senior year. I mean, did you enjoy playing in some tough conditions in soccer sometimes with some of the weather?
Well, the thing about wet conditions with soccer is that it kind of equalizes teams. And so, it would work in our favor when we were playing a competitive team, but maybe not so much if we were better than the other team, because I watch the UVM teams play on turf. I don't like soccer on turf. I think it's fast, almost too fast. And it just doesn't behave the same way as soccer. Maybe if you grew up on turf, grew up playing on turf, it would feel, but I didn't. I grew up playing on grass. And so I think the game is much more beautiful on grass, and it sort of like suits like with turf, I feel like the ball skips faster, it moves faster. It just doesn't feel quite like the same game. But soccer I mean, I remember lots of pouring rain soccer games, and that there is something beautiful about that. Sometimes I think we're so wimpy now. We don't like get our kids out in the rain at all. Everything's always canceled. But it's, I think that you become better in those kind of conditions. And I think we were, being in Maine where the weather isn't always super predictable and you get cold. Boy, I remember some softball games where I was like, I could barely feel my fingers, or they'd like plow the snow off the infield so we could play a game. I mean, those were not great softball games, I don't think. But the soccer games, we definitely had cold, super cold. I mean, we're playing in November, so cold conditions for sure. And then, lots of weather. I think it's part of the game. I think it makes the game beautiful. So
junior year, your spring of your junior year, you studied abroad, right? You went abroad. Yeah. Tell me about that experience.
Yeah. So when I was 15, I was an exchange student in Brazil and lived there, which was a totally amazing experience. Soccer wise, like I got to go watch some of the best club teams in Rio de Janeiro in this massive stadium called Maracanã. I definitely thought I was born in the wrong country when I lived in Brazil. I was like, this place is a soccer place. And so when it came time for me to pick a place to go abroad, I thought, I've had an experience living abroad, and I was sort of just realizing for myself what an experiential learner I was. I did not thrive in learning conditions in which the teacher was just talking at me and I was taking notes. And as I got a little older and I got through all those general education classes and the classes with 150 or 200 people in them, I realized, I do much better learning by doing, which is not a surprise given that athletics was a really like a primary pursuit for me. And so I had heard from a friend who had done this program called Sea Education Association, which is an oceanographic program accredited by Boston University, in which you go live on the ocean in Woods Hole, Massachusetts, which is where one of the most famous oceanographic institutes is, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, and learned oceanography, nautical science, ecology of the ocean, maritime history for 6 weeks on land. And then for 6 weeks, I sailed on a 134-foot brigantine in the Caribbean Ocean. And I collected samples from the ocean. I learned how to sail a sailing vessel and do navigation by the stars, the moon, and the sun, which was pretty amazing. And sort of realized like I really am a learn by doing student. And I think that's definitely carried over. I got my graduate degree in experiential education and environmental education on a school bus. I lived on a school bus and traveled around. It was a total hippie experience. It was awesome. 20 students living on a converted school bus and studying the bioregions of the United States. So I studied the Pacific Coast, and all of that education was self-directed. So I'd get a course syllabi or syllabus, and I would decide how I wanted to learn the end goal, the sort of goals of the class. And studied in the Gulf Coast, the Gulf of Maine, and did some intensive studies in the deserts, in the Sonoran Desert, and got a graduate degree doing that, which was really cool. And then I think, by proxy, like as an educator, I am definitely an experiential educator. I get my students out tree planting, and we do a lot of learning outside. I've done several day overnights where we've done like ocean ecology. And so I think as a math and science teacher, I definitely realize that learning is better when you're doing it, when you're seeing it, when it's living in front of you and moving and breathing in front of you. And it's my understanding that Bates has more of that than they did when I was in college. I think I was a psychology major. I never did a blind study on anyone. I did never meet anyone with Alzheimer's or who had, like traumatic brain injuries. I never did that. And I got a degree in psychology, even though I didn't really know, what that really meant. And I think Bates has done, from what I've read, has done a really good job shifting learning so that kids are out in the community and they're really like experiencing what it means to be, a geologist. Well, geology always had it, but, just getting people out and doing the learning that they're reading about and they're hearing about. And so that junior year really changed my life. I mean, I spent 2 years living on a school bus, studying natural history and ecology of the United States, and then have really taken that into my profession as a teacher, which, I've been teaching for 22 years. So
I would say 2 years living on a school bus, but you obviously traveled a bit on the bus for athletics, I imagine. So
yeah. Oh God. I remember lugging my biology book on those trips. Oh, they're brutal. We drove everywhere. There was never, we would go to Connecticut College and back in one day. There wasn't the budget to stay overnight in a lot of these things. So, we spent a lot of time on the bus, a lot of time. I remember thinking, wow, in the fall with the leaves and stuff, I saw a lot of highway miles and beautiful, colorful landscapes for sure.
Did the team grow closer on those bus rides? Maybe you feel like sometimes?
Yeah. I just think, you get lucky. If teams are close, I think it's luck. I do think you can make closeness and you can build relationships, but I think our closeness was really a function of some really committed, and again, this is soccer maybe more than softball. Some really committed people, committed to the team. I was definitely like a good player, but there were other good players on that team. And I think there was that, no superstars kind of attitude. Like we all made each other better. I think had there been one person that really stood out, then maybe you would have had like not as much closeness. But I think we knew the role that we had as individuals. And I think that was pretty unique. And I think, my senior year, we had the same phenomenon happen my senior year as had happened my freshman year, which is that half of our team was freshmen. So we got another really strong group of athletes. And I think maybe the first time we had depth, and I think that made a difference because let's just say I got hurt. There was truly someone who could step in. And so I think that might have also been the secret sauce with that team my last year at Bates in 91, because I think we had like another really strong class that sort of provided that depth that a team needs. We had 22 players that year instead of just 11. And I think that was pretty special and unique for that team.
And it must have been so satisfying for your senior class to finish strong like you did, right? With the championship.
Yeah, I think so. And I think that freshman group that ended up doing really well after, I don't know I think they had winning seasons after we left and graduated. They actually went to the NCAA. How many times did they go? Two or three?
We have them having gone in 1993. They went to the NCAA tournament and unfortunately lost to Williams. But then they were ECAC runner-ups, what would have been their senior year. And then kind of one down year after that. And then the team ran off a bunch of strong seasons, including a ECAC title in 2005. In the future, but yeah,
long after. Yeah, so I think, I always wondered, like, where would we have been if the NCAAs had been open to us? I remember my year that I went to UNH. This is no cut on UNH, but I was like, I think my team could kick your butt. Like so that was the year after I graduated, and I was really pretty convinced that we could have actually had a competitive match. And so I think that was before, what I think has probably become a dividing line between Division III and Division I. Although we still go down and watch Middlebury play, and they're amazing. And so I don't know, as I would venture to guess that there are Division I programs that are Division III programs that could compete with Division I programs. And so I maybe not with men's soccer, but certainly with women's, I think still, because there's no future in, professional athletics. There is, you could play for the competitive professional women's team, but we're not talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people playing professional soccer after a college soccer experience.
Well, I was going to ask, you mentioned the first Women's World Cup was when you were in school.
Yep.
Did it have a big impact on you watching those women play?
Yeah, so Mia Hamm and Julie Foudy, they're all peers of mine. Christine Lilly, Carla Overbeck. I mean, those are women that was serious love. I mean, that was super, super special for me to see something really real come out of the game. I think soccer probably did it before, it was definitely before basketball. It was definitely before for women's sports. I mean, those women were amazing, and they changed, I think, the storyline for women's soccer in a way that I don't think any other sort of generation has, in terms of that initial moment of equality, to even have a Women's World Cup at that time with really the first generation again of those Title IX women, the women that had, that had soccer when they were 5 and 6 years old, which my mother didn't have. There was no equality, in the 50s for sports or the 60s for sports. So, I was looking through an album. I have real live pictures of those women. When I was playing for the Renegades in Boston, we, and the Women's World Cup was 95, right? In the US, do you know? I think it was.
The famous one was that 99 or am I crazy?
Well, 99 was the famous one.
Yeah.
So so maybe it was that one where I have, let me think. I think it was, yeah. So I was playing for the Renegades in 99. So, so we got to go and watch their trainings at Babson, and we actually got to run out on the field before one of their matches. And as the local club team. So that was pretty special. So those women are they're really my heroes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So any other thoughts on your time at Bates you wanted to share that we haven't gotten to talk about or anything?
I don't think so, other than, it was a really incredible experience for me as a student athlete. I don't know as college would have been the same had I not played sports. And in some ways going to a Division III program was pretty special because I got to play 2 sports, and it's sort of who I struggle a little bit with today's sports because I think people specialize so early. And I feel like the best athletes on my soccer team were multi-sport athletes. And I think there's probably no professional athlete today that would tell you that multi-sport athletics isn't really important. I mean, for injury, it's good because it doesn't, gives your body some other movements to do. I think it strengthens you in ways that a single sport cannot. And I also think it gives you an opportunity to be with other people. Had I only had the soccer team, I think it would have fell short. And if I had only had the softball team, I think it would have fallen short. And so for me, the idea that you can go to a college and play 2 sports is amazing. I don't know how many 3-sport athletes there are out there, but there probably were some. The track coach tried to coax me into an indoor track season, but I was like, I don't think I can do that. And so I would, I think for me, like shout out to multi-sport athletes, because I think that's the kind of experience I think that makes you a better person all around. And it makes you, I can't tell you how many people I've worked with in my life that I've been super close with that also happen to have been pretty competitive athletes. And I think, oh, that's why we get along so well, because I think there is something special about being a teammate. And, I think I draw on those things those characteristic skills all the time. And I think being an athlete is a really special thing. You could be on a concert pianist and you'd get probably the same gift, right? This idea of team.
Yeah.
And we live in such a like me world that, I think it's pretty special if you can leave an athletic experience knowing that you had a role to play on that team that made the team better. One of my children does only individual sports. But in both cases, both Nordic skiing and in cross-country running, it's that team piece that I feel like sort of feeds him as an athlete. And so, in both my children, I think we've encouraged, both my husband and I have encouraged athletics, because there is maybe something you can't get otherwise that you can get in a team sport situation. So I think athletics is it has been an amazing thing for me in my life. In fact, as I get older, I'm like, oh, I miss it.
Next time on the Bates Bobcast, we'll have another interview with a Bobcat great from years gone by. That's next time on the Bates Bobcast.
Bates, Bobcat.